That's right. Tell you, I ended up using this in Costa Rica because I didn't print my books out of sermons, as they called them, over there. And so I had my computer and thought, well, I forgot that it folded around flat, and so I can read it too. It's big, it's there, and it's saving trees. So I'm going green. All right, so Nehemiah chapter 1. Yeah, that was only Wednesday. I was here then. And you're telling me. You are not telling me anything I don't know. Nehemiah chapter 1. This is, again, you understand, Nehemiah was part of the captives that were in Babylon. And, after they had been in Babylon for 70 years of captivity, they were given the opportunity to return back. And, just as we read about in Ezra, something like 2%, I think, when you look at the numbers and of those that returned, only about 2% decided to return back to Jerusalem, and which is just very low. But they did return and rebuilt the temple, laid the foundation for Israel. And the book of Nehemiah begins 15 years after the book of Ezra ends. So almost 100 years after the captives came back to the promised land, some 150 years after the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. And after this amount of time, the walls of the city of Jerusalem they're in rubble. They are it's lying in waste. And the citizens of Jerusalem, whenever you go back to Ezra chapter 4, they tried to rebuild the walls, but they were not successful. And after that, some 75 years before they tried to rebuild the walls, they were stopped by their enemies. No one thought this obstacle could be overcome. And so obviously when people have that mentality that we can't do this, and they lose faith and they lose hope, obviously nothing's going to get done. Fortunately, I feel it a bit, and I know there's a difference in what was going on in Jerusalem, but I struggle with God's churches getting to the point where they feel like they just can't do it anymore. I get it. Times are hard. I get it. It's not easy to reach. Not easy to build up congregation. And I also know there's other underlying factors, and a lot of it I feel like stems to the point of it's so hard to find a pastor. I was just speaking with a gentleman at the funeral that they have a church, and I knew that their church was without a pastor, and they, I was asking him how they were doing with that, and he just shared with me. He said, it's not easy. It's hard. He said, we can't, we've got a couple guys that fill in, but, nobody really expresses interest in staying and maybe even coming back in view of a call. Now, they'll fill in as long as we want them to preach. They aren't interested in the pastoral position. And obviously there's churches around here that are without pastors. So I know that some of that is, but I feel like sometimes too easily churches give up. And a lot of it's because they lose faith and they lose hope. And that's what had happened in Jerusalem. They felt like the obstacle was too much for them to overcome. And they couldn't do it any longer. And so the walls lay in ruin and the people stayed in trouble. And so we get here again, 15 years has the book of Ezra ended, and Nehemiah is in Persia. And so we'll pick up here in verse number 1. We'll read the first 3 verses to start with. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah. And it came to pass in the month Chislev, in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. So, again, Nehemiah lives in Shushan, which is the capital city of the Persians. And he lived in the citadel. And this is the fortified palace, if you will, of the Persians. And so right away, just by this introduction that Nehemiah provides concerning himself, we know that Nehemiah is somebody of importance, right? Not just anybody's living in the palace, and especially in this situation. And so we know he's important. He lives in the palace of the king of Persia. And so he says that he had a friend, he had a brother, so an acquaintance, Hanani, that came. And so he says, I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. Nehemiah is in Persia. Obviously, he's serving the king there in some way, shape, or form. But where's his heart? His heart. His heart. Here Hanani comes, and Nehemiah can't help. He's got to know, how are things going in Jerusalem? How are things? Again, this is 800 miles away, and so he wants to know if those returning, how the people of the city and the city are doing. And you might would think that a man as important as Nehemiah had other and better and bigger things to be worried about, and than to the reality is Nehemiah's never even been there. Think about that for just a minute. He's never been there. All he knows is Persia. All he knows about Jerusalem is what he's been told. But yet he's still concerned about it. And so, again, his heart, why do you think that is? I get that we know that he's heard about it. Why do you think somebody who's never been there can be so concerned for a place? Heritage. He was taught about it. His heart. Yeah, she's teacher's pet over there. His heart, his heart was for the things of God. That's where Nehemiah's heart is, and his heart is not on himself. His heart is on others, and and so the news he receives from Hanani is not good news. It's anything but. He kind of refers to, Hanani refers to the people as survivors. That's not a hopeful title. That's not encouraging, and he talks about that they were in great distress and reproach, and the walls of the city itself were broken down, and the city gates are burned with fire. And so, the bad state of the people and the bad state of the city were intimately connected. The condition of the walls around the city have a direct effect and impact on the people in the city. Right? Why is that? It's their protection. It's again, if you don't have any protection from the outside, and you're vulnerable to your enemies, and so they have absolutely no protection at all. And in fact, an unwalled city was always it was always something that it was nothing of importance there. There was nothing significant going on there. There was constant stress, constant tension. Then if there was anything of value in an unwalled city, it would be stolen away. People would just come in and take it, and there's no defense to stop it. And so, this unwalled city also allows you is that you don't ever know when you're going to be attacked. Any way to prepare, you don't have any way to pay close attention to that and be on the and so they lived in constant fear. The men lived in constant fear for their wives and for their children, and they rebuilt the temple, but they can't ever really worship like they want to worship. It can't be made as beautiful as they want it to be, because you can't have anything of value there. It'd just be taken away from them. So, again, it's no wonder that they lived in distress and reproach and living only as survivors. And I'm just here to tell you, God had a plan for them to be more than just merely survivors. That's not how God intended them to live. God did not intend for them just to live that way. And, He wanted them to be conquerors, right? He wanted them to be victorious. And guess what? Had they remained faithful and trusted and said, you know what? It doesn't matter. We're going to keep laboring. God is going to get us through this. But instead, people got down. They got tired. They got weary. And what'd they do? They quit. They quit rebuilding the walls. They just let them go. Hey, we can't deal with this constant attack. And man, that sounds so much like us sometimes, don't it? Can I tell you that we have to make sure that we put a wall around us to protect ourselves. And that wall is this right here. This is our wall. This is what should be there to protect us. And listen, just as God wanted them to... Listen, our mentality of when we mess up, we make a mistake, our mentality, or the mentality that's out there a lot of times, and sometimes I'm guilty of it, sometimes maybe you're guilty of it, is that we just look at ourselves and we're just an old sinner saved by grace. That's the same mentality they have. This is all I'll ever be. We're here. This is all it's ever going to be. Well, last time I checked, God wants us to be more than just simply... He wants us to be more than survivors too, doesn't He? He wants us to be conquerors. In fact, I believe it's Romans 8:37 that tells us that we should be more than conquerors. How do we do that? We do that through Christ, right? Through Him. It's His power that allows us to become more than conquerors through Him that loved us. And so the city's there. Nehemiah is concerned. He asked the question, how are they doing there in Jerusalem? And Hananiah gives him some news that's just not good. Verse number 4. And it came to pass when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned certain days and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. So Nehemiah hears the news, and then in verse 4 we find his reaction. Nehemiah's action. immediate, and really it could be considered extreme. He sat down and wept. Nehemiah didn't just. Sometimes we hear bad news about places and people, and sometimes it's real easy to say, "Man, I hate that for them." Right? I hate that. Let me just tell you something. Nehemiah's reaction was more than just a, "Man, I hate that." Now here's a guy living in the king's palace. Probably doesn't have a care in the world. I'm sure he's taken care of. But yet his heart is in Jerusalem, and so he asks and he gets the news, and he could have said, "Whew, it's a good thing it's a good thing I'm here. Thank God I'm not there." That's not his reaction. His reaction is one of brokenness. His reaction is such that he sits down and he weeps over the condition, and he begins to weep and mourn, and he did this again. It says that he mourned certain days. That is, that he mourned for many days. Again, this wasn't just a one-time sit down and thinking about his friends and his family in Jerusalem. This is many days. He is broken over the condition of Jerusalem and the people that are there, and so we have, God's going to use Nehemiah to do something in this situation, and I'm sure many of you know and have read, and you'll know what's coming, and but the first thing that God had to do was God had to do something in Nehemiah. God had to prepare Nehemiah. See, any great work of God begins with God doing a great work in somebody. Whenever you go back and look, I believe that God did a great work in Ezra as he prepared Ezra to go and do what Ezra did in Jerusalem. Again, I think about, I believe in the pastor. I believe in a missionary. In order for God to be able to use them to do something great, God must first do something in them. That's true of anybody. Doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter where they're at, doesn't matter where they're serving. God has to do something in them before He can use them to do something great. And so, God had prepared this long ago with, again, Nehemiah's important position in Persia, with a heart curious about the welfare of Jerusalem and the people. And now we see that he had a heart that broke over the needy state that the people were in, the city was in. And so I love it, because you look and you see that God saw the need in Jerusalem. God was aware of the condition of Jerusalem. And God knew that Nehemiah was the man to go and do something about it. Now, did Nehemiah have any idea at that moment? No. But God did a work in Nehemiah. God prepared his heart. He made him curious. He made him interested in the things that were going on in Jerusalem. And now we see just how tender that heart is for Jerusalem when he gets the news. He weeps. God would do something great to meet that need through Nehemiah, but understand there's no way Nehemiah can do this by himself. That's a big task. God has never intended for anybody to go and do a great work by themselves. He's always going to put the right people around them. He's always going to make sure they have the support that they need when they need it. But Nehemiah here's what God needed in this situation. You know what God needed? He needed a leader. He needed somebody that would step up and lead, one who would influence other people to get the job done. And that's really, when you look at the book of Nehemiah, there's all kinds of great books in this world about leadership. I've read some of them. Some of them I've thrown right in the trash, and some of them I thought had some pretty decent stuff. Nehemiah is arguably the greatest book ever written on leadership. That's what it is. It's a book on leadership, and something was obviously needed then, and I believe it's something we still need today, because leadership is influence, right? And see, we often think that leadership is in the church, leadership's the pastor. Can I tell you, we all influence people? Because that's what leadership is. So we all need that. So leadership applies to everybody, and everyone has an area of leadership. And it starts in our homes, right? That's where we have the most influence, and then it branches out from there. But in some way, each one of us is a leader, and so we need to understand that. But leaders have to prepare themselves for difficult work, because leadership is not easy. Influencing people, especially in the right way, it ain't easy. I've heard this saying, and really it's several sayings. Maybe it's all one part of one saying. And I feel like they come in different. I've heard them different, but it says this: there's no winning without warfare. There's no opportunity without opposition. There's no victory without vigilance. Every one of those is absolutely true. You can't have one without the other. Leaders have to have a vision, right? How am I going to influence people? How am I? And so Nehemiah had that. God, he had a vision, and so we as well, if we're going to influence people, we have to, we have to have a vision. Nehemiah knew that through him, God was going to correct the problem, or he was hopeful and wanted God to use him to do this. But this was a problem that had been around 150 years. That's a long time, right? You have to have a little bit of confidence, right? Think about that. There's a problem that's been in existence for 150 years now. I'm going to go fix it. Whew. Good luck. Right? That's one of them churches that they tell us pastors, hey, just stay away from that one. Just let it be. Problem is if God says go, what do? Right? You go. I've had friends have to deal with that before. But you have to have a vision. So Nehemiah sat down. He was broken over the situation there in verse 4. And he sat down and he wept and he mourned for many days. And then it says that he fasted and he prayed. So this is obviously more than just an immediate emotional reaction, right? It's easy. Listen, I can tell you, at 14 years old, when I went to the Philippines, I got there and I saw the condition of that place, and I saw the people, and I saw their hunger for the Lord. I mean, I'm talking about, you're outside with, mosquitoes and bugs as big as your hands and head, and just show up, and guess what? You show up and the people show up. And so I saw their hunger for the Lord, and I thought, man, how are there's something here. They need. And so I was brokenhearted for the Philippines. I still think there's a great work to be done in the Philippines. Now, we've got a lot of missionaries in the Philippines, a lot. But now that was an emotion. God wasn't saying, Jerry, I'm preparing you to go. Nope. I ate one of their delicacies, and that was enough right there to tell me, no, God ain't moving me here. And if you don't know what balut is, go look that up sometime this evening, and you'll do it after you eat or sometime when you're not hungry, because you won't be hungry after you see it. But Nehemiah went, again, we see this as more than just an emotion, because Nehemiah, what's the next thing that he does? He fasts and he prays over the people. And again, sometimes a concern comes over us in a flush and it quickly passes. But listen, I'm telling you, if the Lord continues to work on it, and if He wants it, He's going to let it abide there with you, and it will grow. And you won't be able to do anything with it. It's a burden that will remain until the problem that prompted the burden is solved. And that's where Nehemiah is at. And, note as well what Nehemiah did not do. Nehemiah didn't sit back and say, what are them sorry jokers over there doing? Why they let it just sit there in ruins? Why aren't they working? Why aren't they doing this? Why isn't somebody else standing up? He didn't complain. He didn't whine, or didn't sit back and even say, you know what? I know somebody that can go fix that. No. That's not what he did. He immediately went to what he knew he could do, and that was pray and intensely seek God in this situation. God, what do you want done? Nehemiah also had a clear understanding of who he was fasting and praying to. Who does it say he was fasting and praying to? The God of heaven. He knew, there are a lot of gods with a little g in this world, but Nehemiah knew that only the God of heaven is the one that can really meet our needs. And that's whom he prayed to. That's whom he fasted. And so then we move to verses 5 through 7, and we'll see Nehemiah's prayer here. It says, and said, I beseech thee, O Lord God of heaven, the great and the terrible God that keepeth covenant and mercy for them that love him and observe his commandments. Thine ear now be attentive. Listen to me, Lord. And thine eyes open, that thou mayest hear the prayer of thy servant, which I pray before thee now, day and night for the children of Israel, thy servants, and confess the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against thee. Both I and my father's house have sinned. We've dealt very corruptly against thee, and have not kept the commandments, nor the statutes, nor the judgments, which thou commandest thy servant Moses. Prayer. Nehemiah fasts and we pray, and this is his prayer, but prayer is essential in leadership. If your vision is so big that only God can accomplish it, then guess what you better be doing? You better be praying about it. You better be praying me, and if prayer isn't absolutely necessary to accomplish your vision, you know what I got to say about that? Your goal ain't big enough. Why would I say that? Why is that? If your goal's big enough that you can't accomplish it, then you better pray and ask God to help. But on the other hand, if your goal ain't big enough that you need to pray about it and you need to seek God about it, then your goal ain't big enough. Your vision ain't big enough. Why? Because if I can do it on my own and I need God, then there's a problem with my vision. I need it to be where He and He alone can get credit for it. I want it to be so noticeable that, you know what? That ain't something Jerry Riggs could do. That's something only God can do. I need it to be so noticeable and honest that, hey, guess what? There ain't no way he did that on his own. He had to pray and ask God for help to get through that or to make this happen. That's, and so prayer is essential in leadership. And it appears that Nehemiah prayed for 4 months before he did anything. This was not a one-time prayer. Nehemiah was praying for 4 months. And we get that math because you can go and look at chapter 2 of verse number 1. And so, but later when the rebuilding of these walls actually begins, it only takes 52 days to finish the job. 52 days, but that 52-day project had a 4-month foundation of prayer. I want you to think about that. It's easy to sit back and say, well, it only took them 52 days. Yep, but the foundation is in prayer. That's where it starts. That's what has to happen. And so, listen, he was, not only did he pray, but he was humble. The humility by understanding that it was the God of heaven that he was calling to, and his plea for God, give me your ear, be attentive to what I'm saying, and asking God to hear the prayer of one of his servants, showing that he was depending on God. I'm a believer that God can allow you to be absolutely fruitful for the purpose of maybe exposing your need for total dependence. It may not always be the case, but I believe he can do that. Nehemiah confesses the sins. That he says, both my father's house and mine have sinned against you. Again, confessing this sin openly shows his humility before God. And again, identifying himself as needy. Obviously, Nehemiah was a godly man and passionately put himself with his father's house and prayed by using we instead of they. Again, we saw that with Ezra too, didn't we? Ezra talked about we have sinned. Nehemiah ain't even been there. He could have said, Lord, them folks, they have messed up. But he didn't. He said we. Verse 8 through 10. Remember, I beseech thee, or beg thee, the word that thou commandest thy servant Moses, saying, if you transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations. But if you turn unto me and keep my commandments and do them, though there were of you cast out unto the uttermost parts of heaven, yet will I gather them from thence and will bring them unto the place that I have chosen to set my name there. Now, these are thy servants and thy people, whom thou hast redeemed by thy great power and by thy strong hand. Nehemiah says, Lord, remember. I'm just going to tell you, you talk about entering and approaching the throne of God with boldness. I believe that asking God to remember is a powerful way to come. To remember his promises. He says, Lord, remember the promise that you made to Moses and to this nation. And he's saying, God, I'm asking you right now, make good on that promise. Make good on that promise. And what Nehemiah is quoting is from Leviticus chapter 26 and Deuteronomy chapter 30. And again, this no doubt is one of the secrets to great power in prayer. I've told y'all before, one of my favorite things in my own personal prayer time is to call out the promises of God. I can't tell you what it is about it. I think sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't do that. I believe that we see God's word gives us those illustrations time and time again. And the only reason I think sometimes I'm afraid to do it because, man, I tell you, if I make one of my children a promise, boy, they don't forget that stuff. I mean, they will, but Daddy, you promised. You know, so you be careful when you make them promises. But I believe God in heaven delights in it. You know why I don't like it? Because sometimes it's real hard for me to keep that promise. Not because I don't want to. It's just because I'm human, and sometimes I make mistakes and I forget and I get tied up or I do something. Can I tell you something? The God of heaven doesn't have a hard time keeping His promises. And so whenever we call out His promise, you remembered I made that promise to you. Oh, you remembered that I told you I'd never leave you nor forsake you. Oh, you remembered that I said I would supply all your needs according to my riches and glory. Oh, you remember. I think He delights in it, and you can disagree with me if you want to, but I believe that He does. Nehemiah quoted a conditional promise as he quotes these promises that if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them. See, God has some promises that there's conditions involved, right? He sent His Son to die on Calvary's cross to save all mankind. He has said that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. He said He'll save everybody, but there's a condition. They have to call on Him. They have to believe in their heart and confess with their mouth that Jesus is Lord. And if they'll do those things, then He'll save them. That's a condition. God has done that, and here this is what He says, that if you return to me, if you keep my commandments and do them. So there's conditions there, and again, returning to God, keeping the commandments. He couldn't really know if the nation was keeping the commandments, but he knew that he was keeping them, and because he had identified himself with the nation and their sin, the nation could also identify itself with Nehemiah in his godly fulfillment of these conditions. And so Nehemiah is crying out, and he's putting himself there. Hey, I'm a part of the sin. I'm putting myself there, but I'm also going to put myself over here as one that's keeping your commandments. And so if I can be tied to their sin, they can still be tied to me in doing this. And so Nehemiah puts that out there. He prays, and he's asking God to remember His promises. And then we come to verse number 11, and he says, O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy and to the servants who desire to fear thy name and prosper. I pray thee, thy servant, this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. Nehemiah concludes his prayer by asking God to bless him, because he would soon be speaking with the king. Nehemiah, this first chapter to me is such a powerful chapter. I know the whole book really is, but again, from beginning to end, we see Nehemiah's heart with the people. We see his reaction to the news that he gets from Hananiah. We see his response and how he weeps and he prays and how he fasts and how he's calling on God in this. But never once is he saying, God, would you send somebody? God, can you not find one man? Is there not somebody out there that you can send to go and step up and lead these people and get these walls rebuilt and do this? Why is nobody? He didn't even ask Hananiah. Why isn't somebody doing something about this? Instead, Nehemiah prays. And he knows that he's broken, and he's asking God to have grace and to have mercy. And he ends his prayer saying, God, I'm essentially saying, God, I want to do something about this. And so now, God, I need you to be with me as I go and speak with the king of Persia about this matter. Nehemiah has set in his heart that he, with the help of God, is going to do something about the sorry state of Jerusalem. The walls and the people. But he also knows that without God working and God's intervention, that he can't do anything. Nehemiah knows he could just up and go. But if he doesn't have God's help along the way, it's pointless. Can I tell you, that's the reality in anything we do. If we set out to do anything outside of God's will and without his help, we're going to fall flat on our face. He ends this prayer and he says, I pray thee, thy servant, this day. Go back just a little bit before that. He says, he asked God to be attentive to the prayer of his servant and to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name and to prosper. I pray thee. This is a prayer of a man of action. Not a sideline critic. I'm going to tell you, one of the problems with Christianity today is there's so many sideline critics. Everybody's got an idea of how things should be done. Everybody's got they can tell you how to fix that. They can tell you how to do it. But they're not the ones to do it. They're sideline critics. Listen, let's not be sideline critics. Let's be people of action like Nehemiah. Let's say, God, we need your help. Nehemiah doesn't pray and say, God, make it all better or get someone else moving on this problem. Instead, his prayer is, God, use me to make it better. Use me to make it, to get it back where it needs to be. Use me to get your people drawn back to you. Use me. That's Nehemiah's prayer. The reality is that should be our prayer too, shouldn't it? God, use me. Listen, we could sit here. Listen, y'all, we've got a great church. Okay? I'm just going to tell you how to get home. All right? To me in Costa Rica too, by the way. That's not a shot at them in any way, shape, or form. But I was ready to be home. We got a great church. Every preacher that I have that fills in here always tells me, man, that's good. I appreciate you letting me come. And I said, don't get used to it. Of course, there's some folks at school that have a running joke that Matthew Waldrop, they see him in my room. I tell him I'm in there talking to my associate pastor, but yeah, no, that's, we as good of a church as this is, we could sit here tonight and come up with things that we could find problems with. There's not a church out there that you can't. But if there's a problem, let's do something about it, right? Let's not be sideline critics. Let's say, hey, how can God use me to make that better? If this is a problem, God, use me to help that. I want to see it be better. God, if this is a problem, use me. It's easy to sit around and point out the problems. It's easy to be an armchair quarterback, right? Armchair, reclining coach. I can outcoach every one of them guys just making millions of dollars, right? Ain't none of them offer me a job though. But sometimes we do that in the church though. We can find problems. We can find things that could be better. But when's the last time we've said, God, hey, use me to help make that better? That's what Nehemiah is doing. Nehemiah acknowledges there's a problem and he knows it. You know what? Use me to fix it. Use me. But I need you. I can't do it without you. And you shouldn't do it without him. But use me. And guess what? If God's not wanting to use you for that, he'll let you know that. Because if he's got somebody else for it, he'll use them and he'll let you know. He'll take care of that. But at least be willing. So many of us aren't even willing. We just like to point out the problem. That's how a lot of folks are. Anybody have any thoughts, comments, questions tonight?